Thank you, Carrie. Thank you to our other speakers. It's not the easiest assignment in the world, is it? And thanks to our musical performers. And thanks to all of you for electing to spend part of your Sunday afternoon honoring my mom. I see a lot of familiar faces. Some of you I'm meeting for the first time, or maybe for the first time since I was 5 years old. But all of you together represent the different chapters and phases of my mom's life. And while I'm humbled by the number of dignitaries we have here, I do want to take a moment first to salute three women who don't have lofty titles or impressive resumes, but who in the end were among my mom's most important allies. In addition to the health challenges that Erin just described so thoughtfully, Mom fell and broke her hip about 1.5 years ago. And I'll always know the exact day it happened because it was a Saturday in May in 2016 that her beloved grandson Max graduated from Tulane University with his master's in architecture. Max and I started off our day in great fashion. We ran down to the riverbanks and over the Esplanade and visited her statue this morning. That was a great beginning and something I try to do every time I'm in town. Anyway, Mom suddenly needed a level of care that she wasn't familiar with or accustomed to. She didn't really look at it as care so much as an invasion of her space. And she required a team of caregivers, in-home caregivers, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day around the clock. And when you're Vera, when you're the queen bee, as you put it, Mike, you're used to being in charge. And it's hard to accept being vulnerable. The three women who entered my mom's life, Lisa Kofe, Mele Etiaki, and Leah Fapuyaki, are all friends from the kingdom of Tonga, who week after week, month after month, displayed a level of devotion and tenderness to my mom that was nothing short of heroic. They kept Mom comfortable, they ensured her safety, and they respected her dignity. Although truth be told, she sometimes bickered with them like they were old married couples. It was such an intimate relationship with such few boundaries, and Mom didn't like being dependent. Plus there were some cultural things. She couldn't figure out why you all liked rugby so much. She wasn't crazy about taro or Spam or some other island favorites. She might have even threatened to fire them once or twice. But Lisa, Mele, and Leah kept coming back, patient and loyal. They fell in love with my mom. They combed her hair, they fed her macadamia nuts, they argued about politics, and she learned to accept their care. She even gave them mountains of clothes from her wardrobe, outfits from years or maybe decades ago that she hadn't worn, and they shipped these treasures back home across the Pacific. And so there are women in Polynesia now strutting around with sequins and spangles and rhinestones. And what was so special, on the morning that my mom died, even though they worked in shifts, all three of them were there by 5 a.m. with me, gathered around her bed, sipping hot chocolate and telling stories. They reflected on how few Americans had the fortitude for this kind of work, and they laughed about how it had fallen to three sturdy Mormon women from thousands of miles across the South Pacific to figure out how to make life easier for the former mayor, who herself had crossed an ocean in search of a brighter future. Before the mortuary came, they dressed Mom in a tiny yellow shirt. It had a tribal design and Tonga printed across the chest. Lisa, Mele, and Leah, can I embarrass you just a little bit more and ask you to stand, please? So I now like to tell you 3 stories of my own. The first involves a piñata, the second involves a doll, and the third is about a song. But each of them says a little something about what kind of parent my mother was and what kind of childhood she wanted to create for me. When I was maybe 6 or 7, Mom was taking her first steps towards public service, and she dragged me along to a labor camp somewhere in the Willamette Valley. And I'm thinking it was after the summer of 1968 because she was working for the Kennedy Action Corps, fulfilling RFK's legacy. And she'd taken it upon herself to document the difficult working conditions facing migrant workers in Oregon. And her efforts would actually end up being published in a little spiral-bound volume with a very 1960s-ish title, The Green Ghetto. Anyway, it was someone's birthday because there was a piñata strung over a tree branch, and all these little Mexican boys and girls were taking turns putting on blindfolds and whacking it with a broomstick. And truly, as an only child growing up in Northwest Portland, in an apartment right above the landlord, where I was always told to not clomp over our hardwood floors, I just never seen a spectacle like this. It was so subversive and exhilarating and somewhat violent. If you look at your programs on the black and white photos, the second picture, which I think was up in the slideshow, that was about as wild as my birthday parties got. Anyway, I stood there amazed, transfixed, but timid, not really feeling courageous enough to do any whacking myself. And then all of a sudden, it erupted. And I was liberated, and I let go of my mom, and I threw myself into this scrum of kids, all these giddy children scooping up candy as fast as we could. And then I felt it, a firm maternal hand tugging my elbow. "You can have sweets anytime you want," Mom was saying. I was really confused. I thought I had done the right thing by participating in this joyful, cross-cultural exercise. But she was shaking her head, gesturing towards the ground. "These are poor children. Put the candy back." That is some world-class Jewish mother guilt right there. But think about what she was telling me instinctively without even trying to make this chance encounter one of the most profound experiences of my life. My offense was so innocent, but I was getting this very public, embarrassing lesson in checking your privilege. She was telling me that I'd already won the lottery. I'd won the zip code lottery, and I'd won the parent lottery and the unconditional love lottery, and I'd soon be winning the education lottery. And with that good fortune comes the responsibility to give more than you take. Mom had a defining moment of her own, which has been referred to here tonight. It involved a doll. It was a little boy doll made of plastic and dressed in knit shorts. And it became her security blanket as the Nazis rolled into France and as Paris, for an exiled family of Russian Jews, was fast becoming a death trap. In 1940, the Pistraks had to flee. Mom, who was 7, her older sister Zina, my babushka, Raisa, and my grandfather, Lazar. The doll was the only possession my mom was allowed to keep as they joined the exodus through the south of France to Marseille, then to a seaside village at the foot of the Pyrenees called Banyuls-sur-Mer. When they got to the train station in Banyuls, they were told to look for the Lady in Red. The Lady in Red was Dina Vierny, the teenage model and muse for the great Catalan sculptor Aristide Maillol, who kept a studio in the vineyards and whose work has graced the grounds of this very museum. Dina was sort of like the Harriet Tubman of the Pyrenees. At great risk to herself, she wore a red dress so that the wave of refugees coming into the train station would recognize her and follow her, and she would shelter them to Maillol's studio, then guide them through the web of clandestine trails that would take them over the mountains to safety and to freedom. She saved hundreds of families this way, and it's crazy, I think about it all the time, that I and Zena's daughter, my cousin Deb, who's here today, are just one generation removed from that upheaval. In the darkness of a September morning, our family made their ascent. Dina had got them started, pointing them towards Spain, but somewhere in those hills, as they navigated the dirt and rock and brush, Lazare became lost. My grandfather grew increasingly agitated. He was an intellectual, an author and a scholar, not a rugged outdoorsman. And as they wandered in circles, he began to panic, so close to salvation, but maybe also starvation or capture. My mom was still clutching that doll, but she had started to cry. And as she's told me many times over many years, she remembers her father losing his mind out there, ranting and cursing like a madman. And in one unforgivable moment, he took out all his fear and frustration on her. Lazare snatched that doll from her hands and hurled it with all his might over the cliff and out of sight. 10 years ago, as I was researching a book on my own life, trying to make sense of my passions and missteps, I traveled to France, and in Paris, I met Dina Vierny, who was 89, and as it turned out, in her final months. She received me like family. Of course, she couldn't be expected to remember my mom, but she squeezed my hands and said to me, "My boy, this is life." Then even better, she supplied me with the maps and photos of the very trails she had used all those years ago. And armed with those gifts, I too took the train to Banyuls, where I visited Maillol's old studio, Mom's safe house. And while wandering through the town, I stopped in a gift shop and bought a cheap plastic doll. Then I set off for the Pyrenees to retrace my mom's footsteps. It was actually a beautiful hike, terraced vineyards to towering granite bluffs, a forest bustling with butterflies, a world of lichens and lizards. But then I wasn't a 7-year-old girl with an unstable father running from what would turn out to be the Holocaust. As I neared the summit, I found a patch of rocks on a sloping embankment, and I created, I guess you would think of it as a shrine. I assembled the rocks and put the doll in there, protected by these stones, and I left it as a symbol of my mom's optimism and tenacity to watch over the path that carried her to us here. But when I returned from that trip, and I told my mom all about it and showed her the pictures, she was actually somewhat ambivalent. She was touched by my gesture, this very sentimental, ceremonial exercise that I had performed, but in a strange way, she didn't need the trauma of that experience to be remedied. The doll had left a wound that my mom carried her entire life, but it was a wound that also motivated and propelled her to do more, to care more, to give more. I think in many ways it was the source of her empathy. Because she was not a stranger to her own wound, she was never tempted to turn her back on the wounded. So much of the time that my mom invested in me was about creating the stability, establishing the traditions that she had lost out on as a child. And she was determined that her son, her American boy, would be spared the chaos she endured. Which brings me to my final story. Nothing I participated in as a kid left a deeper imprint on me than baseball, a game I played, a game my son played, and it was my mom who insisted that I embrace this most American of pastimes. My dad would later play a lot of catch with me, inventing these elaborate all-star games. Pee Wee Reese would be hitting a hard grounder and Duke Snyder a towering fly ball that I had to catch. But it was my mom who first dressed me up in a little pinstripe suit and tossed wiffle balls at me in front of the house. She responded to baseball, I think, because it was such an essential part of her assimilation. As a young girl who landed on these shores, speaking only French and Russian, she perfected her English by listening to baseball. Living on the edges of Harlem, as my babushka labored in the factories, after my grandfather ran out on them, Mom would curl up in bed with a radio and tune in to the Brooklyn Dodgers. It consoled her and it connected her to the outside world, to events and causes greater than herself. Baseball also supplied her with her first hero. Before there was RFK, Jackie Robinson captivated and inspired my mom. She didn't have to wage exactly the same battles that he did, although as you saw, she would later stand out in front of the Benson Hotel, banging pots and pans to protest the City Club's exclusion of women members. And some of you who may remember her first campaign in 1972 will recall that she did not receive the endorsement of the Oregonian, which had branded her a, quote, militant housewife. We need more of them. Jackie was a proxy for her yearning to be accepted, to find belonging, and he stood for how one courageous person could confront an inequitable system and single-handedly change the course of history. Mom would have been overwhelmed to see her obituary last month in the Wall Street Journal, which called her a Jackie Robinson of politics. I said this final story was about a song, and that's where Neil Diamond comes in. Mom didn't really follow baseball as a sport anymore, but she still appreciated its capacity to bring people together and lift them up. And over the last year of her life, she developed kind of an obsession with the song Sweet Caroline, which the Boston Red Sox have adopted as their anthem. Again, no real special connection with the Boston Red Sox, but there's this extraordinary video of Neil Diamond performing that song live at Fenway Park on April 20th, 2013, 5 days after the Boston Marathon bombing. And he's doing a call and response with the crowd, 35,000 people all singing, feeding off each other. And when he gets to the part where he says, hands, touching hands, reaching out, touching me, touching you, well, Mom would be transformed. She wanted to go to YouTube and see this video literally every time I visited, sometimes more than once. And I'd sit at her bedside and I'd help her put it on her iPad. She was pretty tech savvy, actually, but Mom loved to have beautiful nails. And she even had a manicurist, the very sweet Angie Wynn, who made house calls right up until Mom's final week. So her nails would always get in the way, clacking against the glass. No matter how fragile Mom was feeling, that song would just make her come alive, glowing, grooving, swaying her head, waving her hands. The more her health declined, the more important this ritual became to both of us, I think. It's one of the final images I'll carry with me, and I hope as I leave you here today, it will become one of yours too. Picture a baseball stadium, a good Jewish boy standing in the infield holding a microphone, a grieving city summoning its strength, and my mom smiling, her heart filled by a song.